David Martinez, good morning, young man. Glad to have you
Good
on.
morning. Good morning, Pat. Thank you for having it. I appreciate it.
You bet, man. Before we get started, I know we were talking a lot offline here, but why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been with Bunzel for the last 5 years now. My adventure and my story was a little interesting. I didn't find Bunzel. It almost felt like Bunzel found me. And that was through some relationships that I had made in college. And so 5 years later, I'm still here and loving it. It's been interesting. Never thought I'd be in packaging, but here we are.
5 years, man. It was just like yesterday I met you. Get a little gray hair there too, aren't you? Look at you in 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a lot of gray hair. My wife and my family tease me a lot about it. They're like, "Hey, what's going on with all these grays?" And it's, I think a little stress and a bit of the aging process for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so when I first met you, I'm going to go back to that day. I was very impressed with somebody, especially with you, is that, that you found sales and you valued that. But you mentioned early on that you had a lot of mentors and coaches to help you along. That's interesting to me.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I actually started, thinking more about my career. What was I going to do? I knew it was going to be a sales role. I'm sure some of my friends and colleagues know that my future, I always thought was going to be in pharmaceutical or medical device sales. That's kind of what I had planned for my career when I was in college. And, you try to make plans, but life has other plans, right? And so I sat down with some of the professors who were in marketing at Cal Poly Pomona, and we basically discussed what my next steps would be. And so one day I was looking for I was looking through a research paper, and some casual way I see this link that was offering a college tuition for your anyone interested in going into the sales profession. So I said, okay, free money for someone who wants to go into sales. Well, I definitely, make those check off those lists. So I was like, okay, let's check it out. And so I started reading into it, and it says, okay, anyone who's interested in going into the sales profession, please tell us what you would do with this money. And if you are selected, how much financial aid would you like? There's about $6,000 in financial aid available. Whoever wants it, come grab it. So I said, being the guy I was, I responded and I said, after I wrote down everything that they had asked and answered their questions, I said, I'll take the 6,000 you're willing to give me. And if you want to give me more, this is how I would use it. And sure enough.
See, you're a salesman already there. See?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So didn't think anything of it. And sure enough, about a month later, I end up getting this email. Says, David Martinez, congratulations. You've been awarded $10,000 for a scholarship. And I was like, this isn't real. I start thinking this is a spam email. I'm checking it, reading it twice. And I read it and I realized, holy moly, this is the actual, financial aid that I had applied for that was free money for the people who were interested in going into sales. And so I'm sure you're going to be familiar with them. This was a scholarship by Access Partners, who was one of our brokers. And so I knew who they were. The only person I knew in that was that it was a gentleman named John Tush who was sponsoring this. And so after I received the money, I said, okay, this is cool. Don't get me wrong, but there has to be something more to this than just financial gain. So I reached out to the financial aid department and asked them, hey, I won the scholarship. I want to know who this gentleman is so I can thank him personally. And so I knew who he was and a little bit about him, because after you win the scholarship, they ask you to send a thank you letter to the gentleman or to the female, male, whoever it was that granted you the scholarship. So I knew his name was John Tush. Didn't know anything else besides that. Reach out to the financial aid department. They tell me who he is, and it turns out he has an office at Cal Poly. So I go to him. Yeah, I go to his office and he's not there, but I didn't give up. I kept following through and I kept bugging to see when he was going to be available. And so he finally calls me out of his blue. He's like, hey, my name's John Tush. I've been hearing a lot of people complaining that you're trying to find me. And so I said, yeah, that's me. This is David Martinez. I'm the person you selected for your scholarship for the sales program. And he's like, oh, you're the young man. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay. He's like, well, I'm going to be in my office at this time, next week. Why don't you stop by and we can chat? And so sure enough, we end up meeting. He asked me, he didn't know really what I wanted. I just, more than anything, I told him, I was like, if you're willing to give a complete stranger $10,000, I just want to know, what position are you in to do that? And how did you get there? So I just started asking a series of questions, really building a relationship with him. And, he gave me a list of laundry to do, read books, do this. And I did them so fast because I was so eager to learn, just really wanted to learn from this gentleman. And so he was just a huge resource to me because he was a bank of just so much wealth. Someone who's been in the sales industry, and particularly in our industry, the packaging industry, for over 30 years, has just been a blessing to me in my career because you get all that knowledge, and he guides you and he helps you get through all these challenges that you may not necessarily want to go through yourself. And so we start having a discussion. He starts telling me, okay, look, I'm going to take you under my wing and I'm going to show you what it takes to be in sales. So we had a few interviews lined up. It was one with Anheuser-Busch, one with a company called Right Height, which sold docking equipment. There was another one that I wasn't interested in. And out of the blue, he says, have you ever heard of a company called Bunzl? And I'm like, Bunzl? I was like, I've never heard of them. He's like, okay. He's like, well, I have a colleague there who I want you to meet. And I just want to see if it's something you're interested in. Packaging was a very, great career for me and my family. I think might be something you enjoy. And in my head, I left that office just scratching my head thinking, what is this guy talking about? Packaging? Like, what is this? And so I met someone with Bunzl and we had a conversation. And to tell you the honest truth, I left that meeting a little more confused than I walked in, because now I really didn't understand what Bunzl was. I had no clue, zero understanding. I just knew they did something with packaging. And so later on, I end up meeting with someone else from Bunzl, and we had a discussion of what they did. It was more detailed than I finally understood. And I said, okay, I'll take a stab at it. Why not? And so, I met with Angie, Scott Gregory, Terry Frank, had multiple interviews with them, and they made me an offer. And 5 years later, here I am.
And after meeting with all those guys, you probably were even more confused, right?
Well, they're definitely a little confused because I felt like they each had their own personality, and we never really discussed much about packaging. It was more about the company itself and what the philosophy was, which I thought was kind of interesting. And it was the interview with Terry Frank was very interesting, but he was a great guy, and
great mentor.
Yeah, he was great. And through the mentorship that I started with the gentleman, John Tush, I basically evolved my career and really set myself up for success. And even to this day, he's the person who I call to when I ever have a dilemma or I want some advice. He's one of the people who I really look for outside of the organization. Of course, there's mentors that I have in here, you being one of them. I remember at an early age when I started at Bunzl, you helped me, you guided me. And I think it's important to find mentors because, so many people get lost and don't know what to do and they're afraid to ask. And to me, I've always been taught that when you don't know something, reach out to someone. There's plenty of people who are, willing to help you out and willing to guide you and really get your career advanced wherever you want to go,
Yeah, no, they're great points. There is a big difference between a mentor and a coach. And a lot of times people confuse it too, but a mentor is somebody that's going to be there pretty much for your life. And they're going to help you out like this gentleman, John, is for you. But it's not very often, David, that people in your age group, not to say they're not looking, they don't have the skills to, but it's just everything seems like it felt pretty good in place for you. You had the skills in your tool belt already to negotiate a higher, grant or whatever, and then also, finding a mentor and then following it through and asking questions. That's something, I guess you can learn that, but I think it's something that's embedded in people, and great salespeople have that. So that's kudos to you, for the follow-up. And we'll talk about customers in a second, but how important that is with customers. But I think just the mentoring portion, you set yourself up for success. Coaches are great to have to coach you through a functional aspect of the job, where mentors will look out. And I think great mentors are built on trust. You agree?
Correct. I agree 100%. And I think part of the reason I was I clinged on to him for so hard was because, I was at the point in my life where I was 25 at Cal Poly Pomona. So I was older than most students. And I realized, or I felt, I should say, that I was catching up, and I really felt behind with most people my age. And so it was a combination of that. And then I have an older brother who's in sales as well. And his career had just flourished. I mean, he was killing it, doing very well for himself. And it just really inspired me to wake up and say, hey, what am I doing with my life? I really need to get it together. I always, have this, friendly competition with my brothers, but always really had this self-motivation to really be successful and to really try my hardest, because I told myself, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it at 100%, and I'm going to make sure I beat everyone. So, it was a little friendly competition within myself. I wouldn't say I compare myself to others, or try not to, but yeah.
Well, hey, if you're in sales, you're competitive, right? And here, because the way I grew up too, I had two brothers and I was very competitive with them. And that's what brings the sales personality. And you said, you don't want to lose. You want to make that sale. You want to be better than anybody else, and you want to work harder than everybody else. I mean, that's just embedded in you.
Agreed.
Salespeople always usually have morning routines or some type of routine. Are you fall in that category too? You have any routines?
Yeah, I do. Definitely. I think it's important. I think for me, what I like about my morning routines, that it really helps set up the rest of my day. And it just really helps me get focused for the rest of my day. For me, I'll tell you the honest truth. I used to wake up a lot earlier than I did. I used to wake up at about 5:30 in the morning and go to the gym, pre-COVID and pre-marriage. I think now, marriage, COVID, I've got a little more comfortable, and I wake up around 6 in the morning. I still think it's a good time to wake up, and I'm trying to work my way back down to 5:30 in the morning, because I think that's a really good time. I like to go to the gym. I take my time, I work out, and then so every other day I like to go running. It just helps clear my mind. And during my workouts and my running, I really start to think about what I'm going to do this day, what do I have to follow up on, what projects are hanging over my head and stuff like that. So it's a good feeling for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm a big runner too. And I'll tell you what, I solved a lot of world's problems when I was on a 5 or 6 mile run. And it gives you the time. You can just think, you can clear your mind. And I think clearing your mind each day, I was on a podcast with another salesperson who said that his routine is to listen to positive podcasts. He gets into podcasts and listening to the speakers are motivational, inspirational. But he said, most importantly, it gives him time to think from one call to the next, how to prepare themselves, because every call is so different, right?
Right.
Yeah. I'm going to quote you here, and this is something that really caught my attention too. Not only, the impressiveness of the using mentors to excel in your sales career, but you had basically said to me one time, relationships will make or break you. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think the title itself, it really helps people understand the meaning behind it, in the sense that a relationship will truly make you or break you. And what I mean by that is, if you look at any relationship that you have, whether it's with your wife, your customer, your friends, those relationships will help determine the type of person you are. It goes to that famous saying, if you're the smartest person in your group, you're probably in the wrong group. And right. I think that speaks volumes to that saying, in the sense that those relationships will always help either advance you, or they will bring you down. Let's just say you're in a toxic relationship. What's going to happen? It's going to drag you down, right? But if you're in a relationship and you're with someone who's going to compliment you, well, what's going to happen? Your chances of success are a lot higher, right? And I think that is it true. And even in my career, for example, the relationships that I have with my customers really help me understand their issues, their problems. What can I do to better service them? And those relationships will help you, because when it comes time to, for a bid or something is happening, those relationships that you have are the things that you can count on to continue the business relationship. And I can give you a perfect example. When I first started at Bunzel, I started working with a customer, and it was a customer that was assigned to another rep. But when I took that account on, I really made it an effort to really know the people who I'm going to be working with and building the relationships. So, a few months after those relationships started, gaining more seriousness, I could say, we basically came to the understanding that, hey, I like to work with David. David's a great guy. He's reliable. And that's what I wanted. I wanted them to trust me. I'm sorry. And so as I built these relationships, I really started to focus in on certain segments of business that we didn't have. And I just started asking, I would say, hey, customer X, what's up with this item? What's up with these things here in the store? Who's servicing those? That's something that we can actually provide, but I'm just really curious to know where you're getting it. And so they started talking about it, and they would mention, but we're having this issue or this problem with certain vendor. And, I started slowly making suggestions, just kind of, planting the seed. And sure enough, one time, when that seed started to sprout, they would, inquire and say, hey, David, we're thinking about this with, to replace certain product. And I think that's really where those relationships started to really play a factor into growing my career and my business portfolio, because it really helped me push myself into those accounts. And it just really, really helped, the company expand ourselves into certain segments within those customers.
You made one of the most important comments throughout. Listening is so important when you are dealing with a customer. And I could remember, and this is a great story, I could remember many, many years ago, early on in my career, and you and I are both kind of, we're in the supermarket and we're in the food processor area. We're not transactional salespeople. Not to say transactional salespeople are bad, but we have to be in for the long haul when we sell. And I was with one of my newest bosses, and we were out making calls. And at the end of the day, we were having lunch, actually dinner or something. He said, hey, I gotta tell you, you are probably one of the best transactional salespeople I ever saw. And I went, I told you, I knew it, man. I'm great. And he looked at me and he said, that wasn't a compliment. And I went, what? What do you mean? He said, well, you throughout this entire day failed to listen to your customers. You didn't listen. You left so many sales on the table. You were worried about closing the foam meat tray business or the film business when you walked from the soaker pads, from the front end, the labels, or the pallet wrap, whatever it was. So I think listening is one area that a lot of us salespeople, because we're so excited, we want to sell stuff, right? You agree? Or
I agree 100%. And I can tell you a pretty funny story, because when I first started at Bunzel, I was eager. You're new, everything's new to you. You're trying to impress your bosses. You're trying to make sales. So you go and chase every single lead that comes to you, right? And you do everything you shouldn't be doing. You're trying to sell based on price. You're trying to just talk your way into the sell, when instead you should be listening. And I remember when I first started, I went with this customer who had reached out to us about some packaging. And so, being new, I walked in, I thought I was a man. I was, I work for Bunzel. This is what we offer. We're going to solve all your problems. This is what you need. I was telling her, this is what you need. And, looking back, and I'm just like, you step back and you're like, what was I thinking? Telling her what she should be doing with her business is just terrible. There's a time and a place where they ask you for suggestions, and this was not it. This was them, hey, we have a need. Can you fill it? And instead, it was me saying, this is what I'm going to fill it with. What you need is wrong. This is what you need. So definitely a learning experience. In fact, I was driving by them last week, and I really thought about stopping by. And so I did, actually. I passed by, they're not there anymore, unfortunately. But every time I drive by that area, I think about that experience, and I'm just like, man, David, what were you thinking?
right.
You should always listen, ask the right questions, and let the customer tell you the problems.
Great point. Because a lot of times, again, we are salespeople. We want to sell stuff, a lot of stuff. But what happens a lot of the time, and you just painted the greatest scenario. We are so excited to get in front of a customer and talk about what we do, how we sell it, how big our company is, how many trucks we have, how many products we have on the shelf. We forget to put ourselves in the customer's operating reality, right? We have to uncover the most important thing about their organization, which is their desired outcome, their gap. You've heard the word gap, and we miss that.
Correct.
Why do we miss it? Why do you think salespeople miss it all the time?
I think because, I think a lot of salespeople are, I'm trying to find a nice word. I don't know, egotistic is the right word. Maybe it rings true for some people, but I think we're just so full of confidence, and our extrovertness automatically sometimes gets the better of us and really blinds us to the reality that we should be listening. We should be trying to find those gaps. We should really just ask the right questions and let them tell us instead of us telling them. And I think a lot of the times, I just think it's simple as that. I just think sales reps sometimes are just, they think they know it all. I can give you an example. One of my coworkers who is no longer with the company. I remember one time, and this is perfect. This is classic sales rep. I asked him, hey, I just finished reading The Psychology of Selling by Brian Tracy. Would you like to read it? It is a phenomenal book. And he looked at me, he said, you're reading books? He's like, I know everything there is to know about selling. He's like, I don't need to read, tell me how to sell. I literally just kind of turned away, and I was like, wow, that is the most, absurd thing I've ever heard that gentleman say. And I was just so stricken by that. And I was like, this guy is not the smartest guy in the tool shed, isn't the tool in the shed, as they say. And I was honestly just taken back by just a statement, not the fact that he didn't want to take the book, but the fact that he said, I know everything there is. There's nothing a book can teach me. Can you imagine someone telling you that there's nothing a book can teach me, and how absurd that sounds?
Yeah. And for salespeople, you have to be open-minded. You can't be closed-minded.
Correct.
Customers today, I talk about this all. The customer 30 years ago is totally from the customer today. The customer today is more educated. They have the internet in front of them. They have so many social media outlets to go to get their information. You said earlier something about reactionary. You're not a reactionary type person, which is great, because a lot of times when you as a salesperson or sales rep and you're in front of a customer and you get reactionary to, let's say, an objection, your price is too high or your deliveries are always late, we tend to react, and the customer will pick that off. They'll say, you know what, David and Pat, they don't get it. They're reacting to the situation. Whereas yourself, if you're mentored correctly, you're going to ask, well, tell me more about that. Why is our price too high? What do you compare it to? Tell me a little bit more about how that affects your business. And I think customers, I know they do. They understand when you respond to them means that you're more open-minded. You've done your research. Reactionary people are just quick to the punch. Boom, boom, boom. You can't tell me anything. I'm the greatest. I know it all. I've done this before, right?
Right.
And we've all been guilty of that at some point.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah. I recently was on a sales call with a colleague also. And, perception has a lot to do. Your perception to me is how we experience reality. And a lot of times my perception might be different from your perception. And the colleague and I went on a sales call with a prospect account and went on for 20 minutes about, beating the chest, how big a company we are, the trucks we have, the employees, we're the experts, and you can't teach us anything type thing. And when we got out the sales call, he had mentioned, hey, this is a sure thing. I got this one locked up because I was really good in that meeting. How'd you feel? And my reaction was that, were we on the same sales call? I mean, were we, we were with the same customer, but I had totally different understanding how that meeting went.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about the customer's desired outcomes. We didn't ask him what his organizational goals were. You know, what's in it for you? Because a lot of times customers will say, what's in it for me? Right. So
I agree. I've actually had that. I remember when we were talking with the customer, I was with some of my bosses and we were at customer X, and we all sat down with their board of directors for the different departments. And we presented basically a plan to take them DSD and absorb some of their other business from their competitors at a lower cost. And I remember one of the directors on the other side basically said, well, what's in it for you? Why is Bunzel being so nice? Why is it that you guys all of a sudden want to do all these things for us? You know, what's in it for you? And I remember one of my bosses basically came out and gave just such a great response to it. And he was honest with them. He told them the truth. He said, I want to do this because I'm going to take this business away from your competitor. And in return, you know, that gaining of the business from the competitors is going to help me offset the additional cost in operations to service you. So
yeah, and whatever the outcome is for, you know, for Bunzel, that, you know, we have to operate somehow too. The customer, to your point, the customer's opinion and their desired outcomes are paramount. They have to be. And then how we work that into what we do is what we do well, you know, because we're in the logistics supply chain, solutions and programs. So I want to go in a little different direction here about something. You started in college. Was there any special courses in college that you had to take for sales? Were there any available at that time?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you bring that up. So when I was in my senior year, Cal Poly actually initiated a sales group. It wasn't necessarily it ended up turning into a class, but the initial thing was, so my mentor, John, basically wanted to give back to a university, and that somehow he ended up at Cal Poly. I really don't understand the story, but he ends up going to Cal Poly. He starts a group for sales individuals and people who want to grow into that career. And so he teamed up with the marketing department, and they started offering after class groups and, you know, kind of like clubs almost. And so that evolved into actually starting a sales 101 class. And unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to go into that class. But what I did end up doing was, I believe in giving back. I think it's something that we all owe it to the younger generations that are going to be coming after us. And I realized how much help I received. And so going back to what you asked, in college, when I graduated, they had really started to focus on a mentorship program for alumni. And so I joined that, and I actually am part of that to this day, where I take young individuals and I help, you know, find them either careers, or I show them what it's like, what it's a day like in a sales position, and, you know, what it entitles and what are the different sales opportunities that are out there. And so it's been really rewarding to do that. And, you know, to answer your question a little bit further, although I didn't have it in college, I think it was phenomenal for me to actually join these sales groups, because it really taught me the importance of building relationships. And at the end of the day, and it's something that so rings to me. I remember that gentleman, one of the speakers who came in there, said relationships will make you or break you. And I still think about that quote to this day. And, you know, he gave a ton of examples where he was under fire from competitors based on price. And because the relationships were there, the relationships saved him, because even though the competitor came in at a lower price, the relationship that he had with the buyers really saved them, because they prefer to buy with him at a, you know, premium cost than a competitor at a lower cost. And so, yeah, it's those classes and what we did in those clubs was really, really cool. We did a lot of like role playing, where you would be a customer and someone would be a sales rep.
Right.
And you would try to get, what's the word I'm looking for? You try to get them to react, and you would try to kind of get them mad and see, you know, what the objections are and how someone in a sales professional would go about that. So, yeah.
There's you can't say enough about a customer relationship is, setting up from the get-go, like you mentioned, having that what we call the interdependent relationship where both of you, the salesperson and the customer, have the same amount of influence and status and say in the relationship. You have to, because that's all based on trust, the credibility portion. Rapport and respect comes when you have all those components there, all the tenants in there. Customers will, like I said, will pick you off if they know you're not interested in them, as far as the services that you provide. Tell me a little bit more about your strength right now as a salesperson. You exude a lot of confidence. You exude a lot of organizational skills, which is great. But I always feel that people, no matter what, have other strengths that they're really good at. Do you see yourself moving into other strengths? And what I mean is more like leadership and even mentoring and coaching. Like you said, you want to give back, and you have given back to a lot of your colleagues.
Yeah, definitely. I think the next steps for me is really, and I'm one of those people who believe that you're always learning, you're always growing, even in the segments that you feel strong in, because there's always room for improvement, in my opinion. And I think for me, leadership is where I'm really focusing in. And I've been really having conversations with my mentor, because he led a team, he grew his team, and he became president, and then he became CEO of the company. So he ran a company with, hundreds of people below him. And it's a challenging thing to lead people. I think the mentorship program at Cal Poly has really helped me, because it helps, show you, people who are eager and they're coming to you for advice, or coming for you to help them through their trials and their situations. And you look at your own experience and you reflect on that, and you say, okay, I have a similar situation here. This is what happened with me, and this is how I navigated it. And maybe you should think about this. And you help them find, they're called blind sides. And I learned about this when I was in school. It talks about, like you said, your perception of what you see and the things that you're not seeing. And so during this mentorship program at Cal Poly, I think it's really helped me see people from all walks of life, and, really see their day-to-day lives, and help them steer them. Maybe I have the answer, maybe I don't. And that's okay if you don't have the answer. But I think the most important thing is not to say something just to say it, but to really help them. And it's okay if you don't have the answers. You say, hey, I don't have the answers, but let me find you someone who does. And I think for a leadership, you want someone, and a leader, you want someone who's going to tell you the honest truth, and is not going to BS you, but they're going to help you achieve your careers and your career goals, and meet all those goals that you have set for yourself and for your company.
Yeah, absolutely. If you had to say your mentor had one enduring quality, what would that be? And I promise not to tell him what you said.
That's it's a really good question. He has, I don't even know what the word is, Pat, but he has a characteristic of that when you talk to him, what he's telling you is the most sincere thing and the most truthful action. It's a confidence that I can't explain to you. And I'm sure you have mentors who you talk to, and when they give you advice, or when you talk to them, the minute you sit down, you can't help but to really just be, I don't know if smitten is the right word, but you can't help but to really just be kind of like an awe, and just be like, man, this guy is just like a wealth of knowledge. He always knows the right thing to say. And the confidence that he extrudes is something that if this guy was taking you to battle, you would be armed and ready to fight to the death because of the leadership and the skills that they have and the way they come about. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm your question right, but he's very charismatic, and he's very intelligent, and I feel like every time I come to him, he always knows what to say. He just, sometimes I kind of know where I want to go into, and he knows what I want to hear. And he may not necessarily tell me the way I want to hear it, but he'll tell it to me the way it is. And he's like, this is where you're at. This is what you need to do. And it's just so confident in the way he says things. It's really cool. And that's why every time I talk to him and I have conversations with him, I love those conversations, because I leave them feeling so much more confident in myself. And I feel so much, I feel more confident in the decisions that I'm going to make.
Yeah. And, if you make a list, of what you think is the most important qualities of a leader, a mentor and coach, is that you want number one, trustworthy, you want charismatic, you want somebody that's intelligent, somebody who's a subject matter expert. But you really need somebody that can relate to you as your mentor can on a one-to-one basis, because he or she, whatever, because a lot of people will have different type of mentors, they will be a big part of your life, and they have to know you as a person. So getting to know you as a person is probably a good quality that a mentor has, and they know, what pushes your buttons and what's not, and they're a confidant. So I think those are all great qualities. So confidence is what you're talking about with John, that, confidence in knowing who you are and what you're about is very important.
It is. And one thing I wanted to touch on really quick, I think there's a mentor for every aspect in your life. It's good to have multiple mentors. I can honestly tell you, I have a mentor who I had in college who didn't give up on me, who, every time I try to quit and drop out of college, she would be there and she would call me. She sometimes would literally, she was a counselor. She would go to my class and make sure I was in class. And if I wasn't there, I kid you not, she would call me until my butt was back into that class. I swear to God. And it's just, the fact that someone cared enough about me and cared about my education more than I did, because they wanted me to succeed, just speaks volumes of the personality and the person that they are, I think. And so, I still talk to her to this day. And in fact, she had dinner with my wife and I just a few weeks ago. And, even in Bunzel, having mentors, just like yourself and, people like Tom, I would say Tom has been yeah, he knows that, but I never try to say it too loud because I don't want it to go to his head. Right. You just have to find those people who really have your best interests at heart and who have a wealth of knowledge and want to help, see you succeed in your career.
See, and that's why it's so important when I wanted to focus in on that question, that quote, relationships will make or break you. And what you've done very well throughout your life with a mentor, with getting out to meet people, with your peers, giving back to the people that you met in college, that's all about building relationships. And exactly, that's why you're successful. What you do is because that's the core of who you are, because that's the way you were brought up and that's the way you were mentored. See, so yeah. But hey, you've been too perfect so far. I want to know about a bump in the road. Have you had any bumps in the road yet? I'm going to finish on the bumps in the road. So what do you think?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm definitely far from perfect. I'm not this, perfect person. I have a lot of flaws. I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I can tell you about a lot of different situations that didn't go my way. I think one of the biggest bumps in my road was in my early career. We talked about the reps who know it all, right? And I remember starting in my career, I was definitely one of those people who was full of himself, who thought was unstoppable, who was maybe a little too confident. And I went to one of these, it was a sales club at Cal Poly. I went to one of the sales clubs and I was a presenter. And I remember after the presentation, the professor, who was John, my mentor's counterpart at Cal Poly, came up to me and said, "Dude, you're an absolute a-hole." And he was dead serious. And I was like, "What?" Like, he was like, "I just want to be honest with you." He's like, "I love your presentation." He's like, "But the way you carry yourself," he's like, "you need to tone it down." He's like, "You need to be humble." And I was just, talk about someone who was just completely thrown for a curveball, kind of like what you said earlier about your boss who told you, your sales, call was not as great as you thought it was.
Right.
It was a shock for me. And it was definitely something that made me realize, hey, if this guy's telling me something, what are my customers saying? What are my bosses saying about me? And so I think that was a humbling experience for me. And it really something that resonated with me to this day, remaining humble, keeping yourself, really humble. Don't think you know it all, because you don't. There's always someone smarter. There's always going to be someone who's better than you. But it definitely threw me for a loop to hear that from someone. And then I remember I heard it from someone in our organization as well. And that was kind of scary. So definitely a wake-up call. and a huge bump because I think it really stunted my growth as a person. And I think I'm still working on that, but it's definitely something that really hold dearly to my core.
Well, and absolutely well put, well spoken there, because there's always that opportunity in your life when somebody needs to bring you down a notch, right? And
Yes.
it's germane to how you are growing as a person. And if you don't have that mentor or that friend that says, dude, get over yourself, okay? And so
Basically.
yeah, and it teaches you, hey, humbleness is a virtue to have, and of course, you are one of the most humble people I've ever met before. So I appreciate that. But and confidence, and confidence is something you want. Salespeople always want that, but when you tailor, the older you get, I'm not saying the older you get, the smarter you get. It's just that you tend to lessen up and say, hey, listen, I don't need to be where I was when I was 18 or 20. Now I need to know how to be that person that can relate to everybody, not just a certain crowd of people. So
I agree 100%. Sometimes it's challenging because you walk into a customer who might be twice your age and they look at you and they say, hey, what's this kid doing? Trying to tell me how to do business, So
right.
To what you said, early in my career, and I'm still only 5 years again, but when I first started at Bunzel, it was definitely sometimes hard for me to have confidence around my superiors because I really wanted them to like me. So I watched what I said. I was always a little more nervous around them.
Right.
Because as I've advanced and grown at Bunzel, I definitely have learned to have more confidence around them and, speak more freely. And whenever I don't agree with them, I'll tell them, hey, I don't agree with this. And sometimes it can be a challenge, but I think it's good for my growth.
Absolutely. Personal growth, and you never stop growing. That's what and I know you'll never stop growing. David Martinez, David.Martinez at bunzelusa.com. You've been a absolutely awesome guest. And I wanted to get to the whole portion about relationships will make or break you. And I think you brought that out. And it's very obvious that resonates in your life from beginning to the end. So I appreciate that. I'm going to give you the last word. Any books that you've read before that you want to share that are inspirational or anything?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit, or I mentioned it, I should say. Some of the books that I highly recommend would probably be The Psychology of Selling by Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, and he's got tons of books. Those are some great, phenomenal books. But recently, I'm going to be honest, I haven't been reading as much as I'd like to, but I've been listening a lot to podcasts. I think podcasts are the way to go because you get to run or work out while you listen to them.
Right.
And it's really more attention grabbing because it's an audio thing and you're having a real live conversation. People are having real life conversations. So it's not as dull, I think. And lately I've been reading or listening, I would say, a lot to what was his name? Modern Sales, and it's by Liston Witherhill. I can't really pronounce his last name, but Liston Modern Sales, wherever you listen to podcasts. Phenomenal gentleman. He just basically interviews people from all walks of life, whether it's a product-based or a service-based sales position. He just breaks down the science of everything, even things we're discussing now. How do relationships help you? How do they break you? How do you follow up? How do you, dive into sales during the pandemic? They even talk about that. I'm like, what did a sales rep have to do to make budgets and make sales meet during this pandemic? So it's just really interesting because he covered a lot of topics. And as a sales rep, I love learning and I like hearing other people's experiences because then you can relate to it and you say, oh, I never thought about it that way. Maybe change your approach into how you go about calling on a customer.
Right. Absolutely. And you and I talked offline. You're going to send me that link and then I'll post it in the podcast notes when I send this podcast out to the audience. So they'll have it in front of them. All right.
Absolutely. Pat, thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure. I just want to say thank you for doing this podcast. I think it's phenomenal what you're doing and keep up the great work.
Podcasts are so awesome. You can get a lot of content in a little time. So I appreciate it. So thank you for being a great guest. All right. Thanks.
Absolutely.
All right.
Bye-bye.